indeed is the second time this year when I'm in Madrid talking about digital development. And as we saw today from Secretary General of the Ministry explaining, it's not only because of the great food that we had some experience yesterday on that, and thank you, Vincent and the team for that, and great surroundings, but also really strong digital development that we saw in information here today. So I'll today speak about how we can achieve digital development together and what ITU is doing there and how you can join us. But first, I probably should start with what is ITU. And we still, even in this community of telecommunications people, I still realize that not everyone knows about us. And still that phrase of we are us being the most important organization that no one knows about is still sometimes is true. So ITU, or International Telecommunication Union, is a United Nations digital agency. So we're responsible for most of the things digital, and especially all the things telecoms in the United Nations. And we've been established in 1865 at that time to harmonize the groundbreaking technology of telegraph and make sure that that works across the borders. Of course, since then, a lot of things happened, and now ITU works across the broad domain of telecommunications. We harmonize radio frequency spectrum and satellite orbits, and this year we'll have our World Radio Communications Conference, where the global community will gather to do exactly that. We promote digital development across the world, as well as we develop technical standards. And a big part of my talk today will be devoted to that. And we means 193 member states. That means the whole world community plus 900 sector members, that is private sector, academia, that join us in that work. So first of all, the context, and already today I think we heard a little bit of why fiber is important, why digital is important, and I think Ulrich already mentioned, how COVID demonstrated that as well. And I think, and indeed here, and I think the last few years, if we ever needed a proof to the importance of fiber and digital, really showed that. So, so in the first few months, and when the COVID-induced lockdowns started, so we saw the increase in traffic by 40%. But that doesn't seem, it's tapering off, but however not that drastically yet. So last year we saw, again, statistics show the increase of traffic by 23%. So we still have a huge growth of traffic. We also see the increase of the broadband speeds. So again, if we, so the statistics say that in the last 5 years, that speed would have increased to double from around 45 megabits per second in 2018 to 110 megabits per second in 2022. And growth is evident in the last numbers, with around 5.7 billion mobile broadband connections last year and 1.3 billion fixed broadband connections. So it's great progress, however, we still, and it's always important to remember, we still have, of course, 2.7 billion people unconnected. In that context, of course, fiber, FTTH especially, plays a huge role, with around 65% of fixed broadband connections being FTTH and FTTB connections. And the growth of the fiber is seen everywhere. Just in the last decade, we saw 1 million kilometers of new fiber in Africa region as well, just to give you a perspective as well. So we as ITU, our neutral platform for all the technology harmonization. However, we can't miss but recognize the importance of fiber in this regard, not only by bringing the high-speed, reliable connectivity to the end user, but also powering wireless networks, including 5G. I think was mentioned by Vincent there so far. So we need that development, and we need that development to reach everyone. However, we do face challenges, and already a few of them were mentioned today. For example, investment environment. And of course, investment environment has been really changing over the last few years. COVID, interestingly, actually was in many ways positive for infrastructure investment, with a lot of funds and money flowing, and cheap money flowing in the industry, fueled by the very low interest rates. However, the situation is changing now, so with a changing financial environment, which interestingly favors some players, however, is not so favorable for other players, especially the more new alternative operators that fuel their growth with the cheap debt available in the last few years. How can we sustain that investment with keeping with affordability goals as well. And we heard that as well before about the importance of affordability. At the same time, we understand, especially investment community gathered here, actually looking at those repricings as a very positive thing and as something that allows them to value prospects of the industry much better. The second piece for me is very important, is resilience. And I think actually the world today is showing how resilience is probably is more important than ever. Over the last 50 years, first of all, the rate of natural disasters increased fivefold. So we have nature that we have to deal with. If we look forward-lookingly, for the next 10 years, the top risks facing global economy, as per the World Economic Forum, is cybersecurity threats and failure to mitigate or adapt to the climate change. What we heard before from Yuri, that we have another big risk, that's maybe for some of us felt very distant, but we have war and, let's say, man-made disasters that we also need to face, as well as telecommunications industry as well. And we, of course, face climate crisis as the most existential issue for us and as a community, as a human community at large. And of course, we need to ensure that the digital development is not just inclusive, doesn't just reach everyone, but it's also sustainable for us. And that it contributes to resolving the problem rather than contributes to creating the challenges for the humanity. Of course, ICT industry, we always say, produces only 2% of the global emissions while contributing to much more to a reduction of much more emissions around the world. However, 2% is 2% too many. And I think we can do a lot to tackle that. So what are the solutions? So first of all, it's not only the money, by themselves, needs to find the right environment for those money to be invested. And regulatory environment being crucial. And again, I don't want to repeat a lot of speakers that we heard before, from Roberto explaining what we could look forward in Europe, to Ulrich outlining some elements of the really good regulatory environment that we hope to find and that could create positive investment environment and lower this investment risks. Then, of course, is the industry practices, especially when we talk about things like green data centers, renewable energy commitments, energy efficiency commitments, and things like that. Is a lot of the industry itself is doing. And finally, technology. And I'll speak in a bit about what ITU contributes to that. So technology evolution that enables us having faster connectivity, cheaper there, but also allows us to, again, to contribute to the world more sustainably. And when we talk about all optical networks, or green fiber for short, we're again talking about potential of savings up to 40% or more than 40% in energy and in carbon emissions as well. So now, finally, to the ITU. So who are we in this context and what we're doing? So first of all, technical standardization. So ITU is a standard organization with a full slew of technical standards for optical networks, from passive optical networks, PON, to transport, to subsea, from the whole chain. And majority today's FTTH networks are powered by our PON standards, and which we've been developing now for years. And today we are on the 7th generation, and we have, to use a technical term, our ITU Study Group 15, so our standardization body that actually deals with that and standardizes. And the latest standard foresees the 50 gigabits per second wavelengths technology, compared to the current, I think mostly, technology that is being now mostly deployed is 10 megabits per second and 25 megabits per second that's now coming. But I think that means also the 50 megabits per second wavelengths is coming very close behind. Sustainability. Again, from our standardization work to our best practices work. So we have our, what we call ITU Study Group 5. So again, our standardization body that deals with the sustainability and environmental issues, that works on standards that helps telecom operators and others assess environmental impact on energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions, helps set greenhouse gas trajectories for the industry to meet climate goals set in the Paris Agreement, provides guidance on setting net zero targets and strategies, as well as ensuring reporting across the value chain, including so-called the most difficult to get Scope 3 emissions. So it means the whole value chain emissions. And we also issue industry reports, helping the ICT industry to see where you stand with a recent report on the, again, ICT industry, ICT companies' emissions. Finally, we're providing or enable access, sorry, it was the second point, not finally yet. We're providing or enable access to credible reference information for policymakers, regulators, and the industry. So we have, so first of all, through our mapping and infrastructure information efforts. So if you go to bbmaps.itu.int, so you'll find the broadband maps for the whole world in a very visual way. And again, we make sure that those maps help drive openness of the markets, direct investment, increase resilience to see where the gaps are. We're now further strengthening those efforts through the open fiber data standard that allows all operators to have a standardized way to expose that information, to share that information, to exchange that information, and for the other parts of the community, including investors and governments, to look at that information and to evaluate that. So we're also working now on the project with the European Commission as well to enhance those mapping efforts in continents outside Europe, especially in Africa as well. Then toolkits, that help policymakers, regulators, as well as industry to make infrastructure decisions and decisions that impact them. So such toolkits as last mile connectivity toolkit, as our infrastructure business planning toolkit that are used by regulators and policymakers, especially around the world, to make those decisions. As well as exchange of the best practices and providing guidance to all. So through such bodies as Broadband Commission. So Broadband Commission is a body that's convened by ITU and UNESCO and brings industry leaders and different government leaders to look how broadband can help address sustainable development goals. We have a so-called state of the broadband reports annually that assesses that, but also specific reports, such as one recent on 21st century financing models for bringing broadband connectivity, for bridging broadband connectivity gaps, again, on financing models for broadband, that again, policymakers around the world are using. GSR, or Global Symposium for Regulators, is our annual event, and this year we'll have in June in Sharm el-Sheikh. So is again, the main audience is regulators. We have an industry engagement as well to allow regulators and industry to exchange opinions. What is that environment that will help shape the investment environment for digital development? And again, the GSRs also issue best practice guidelines. For example, 21, we had regulatory guidelines on regulatory uplift for financing digital infrastructure access and use. We have platforms that enable information to regulators, such as Digital Regulation Platform, Infrastructure and Connectivity Development Framework Portal, that again enables sharing information, as well as different other ways to exchange information between stakeholders, such as our ITUD or development sector study groups, where we, for example, analyze economic aspects of national telecommunications and ICTs. And the last period, we had a specific document on different models for infrastructure sharing, including commercial negotiation and so on. And that enables, again, regulators and policymakers around the world to adopt the best practice in that regard. So what is now final is partnerships. So we're bringing international community, both private and public sector, together to advance the goals on broadband connectivity and digital development around the world. So such partnerships as Connect to Recover that aims to strengthen digital resilience around the world, and we started that in the wake of COVID-19 with the help of a number of governments, involvement of a few stakeholders, such as GIGA, our flagship initiative with UNICEF, which aims to connect every school to the broadband internet networks and every student to the digital world. And it now, so far, has mapped 2 million schools' connectivity requirements and connected over 2 million students in more than 5,500 schools in 20 countries. So again, very specific. And as well as our overarching initiative, Partner to Connect, through which different stakeholders, industry, governments, pledged $30 billion USD through 600 pledges, again, to progress digital development together. So this is what we do, and I think the purpose of my today's talk is to invite you to work with us on that, not only Europe, and it's very important, but around the world, to bring those practices from Europe to around the world, to find those potential kind of investment opportunities around the world, and to build that joint dialogue between industry, governments, other stakeholders to make sure that we bring this digital development to all. And thank you very much. Thank you.